Now, the war between Hamas and Israel is significant from a regional perspective surrounding Israel, but it doesn't really broadly impact global economics, peace, stability, and security. Now, this might seem somewhat insensitive, as if I'm saying this conflict doesn't matter, but even though it does, it certainly does. But it only involves local parties confined to a specific region surrounding Israel. It doesn't really have the potential to expand to a wider conflict within the specific context of Israel and Hamas. This is because countries neighboring Israel, like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, are displaying a remarkable balance in their approach, showing support for Palestine while avoiding direct involvement in the conflict. Sure, Lebanon's Hezbollah and smaller Syrian groups have engaged Israel on a limited scale, but also have been restrained themselves to prevent a regional escalation. Jordan and Egypt remain neutral and are only likely to engage in any kind of hostilities if there's a significant escalation. However, there is one group, and it is 1,100 miles from Israel, that is creating the potential for a wider conflict. Yemen's Houthis and their roughly 200,000 fighters have captured global attention by targeting maritime traffic in the Red Sea and threatening global economic interests. And I can tell you, nothing will bring decision makers and the powerful elite online more than messing with their money. I mean, the Houthis hit a Norwegian commercial tanker with a missile in the Red Sea. Now, the Houthis control this southern tip of Yemen here, and it's a little bit mixed. I mean, it kind of cuts up here, but clearly this region right here of the Red Sea is where they're conducting these operations to interdict civilian shipping. Now, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is critical for oil shipments and is the strategic focus here. The Houthis' actions in this area, unlike the war in Gaza, do have wider implications due to the strait's importance to global trade, specifically oil transport. Now, as I said before, the conflict in Israel itself has minimal impact on the global economy. However, the Houthis' disruption of Red Sea shipping routes is significant and could have some global economic repercussions affecting oil prices and international trade. And this is because up here we have the Mediterranean Sea, and the movements through the Red Sea get to the Mediterranean, to the Arabian Sea, which feeds into India, around to all of the Asian nations, including China, Japan, etc. This is why it's significant. Now, the Houthis' belligerence includes attacks on international shipping and potential threats to the oil shipping of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which affects the entire world. Their actions are a part of a broader regional conflict that has been taking place for years, with support from Saudi Arabia against the Houthis and support for the Houthis by the Iranians. International efforts to address these threats include a potential coalition of naval deployments to secure shipping routes. Russia supports the Houthis because disruptions to the oil market benefit Russia's main economic driver, which is energy sales, and they have seen those plummet since their invasion in Ukraine, so they need that income to rise with the oil market rising due to instability in the Middle East. Now, the U.S. Navy has been actively involved in the region with ships like the USS Mason and the USS Carney intercepting Houthi missiles and aiding those vessels that have been attacked. Now, while the U.S. has executed airstrikes against Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, they have yet to do so in Yemen. Now, this hesitance is influenced by political considerations, particularly the Biden administration's focus on maintaining a fragile peace in Yemen and avoiding a broader regional conflict that previously involved Saudi Arabia's backed fighters taking on Iranian-backed Houthis. Now, the White House is intent on preserving the current truce and is cautious about engaging in any action in Yemen that might lead to yet another front of this war in the Middle East. The U.S. officials acknowledge that military action against the Houthis does remain a possibility, and it has not been excluded from their strategic options. However, they emphasize that there's a difference between the strikes in Iraq and Syria and trying to strike the Houthis in Yemen. They say that the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria have used drones and rockets and ballistic missiles to target U.S. bases. These attacks have resulted in various injuries among troops, and primarily minor ones, where they returned to duty shortly thereafter. The U.S. did retaliate and conducted several airstrikes aiming at weapon storage facilities associated with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as militias in the area. Additionally, the U.S. carried out strikes in Iraq in response to the Iranian-backed militias' attack of Al-Assad Air Base using short-range missiles. Now, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the United States is in discussion with various countries to form a maritime task force to ensure the safe passage of ships in the Red Sea. The task force potentially could involve the U.S., France, United Kingdom, and Israel, and would counter the Houthi threat, as well as conducting some proactive measures against Houthi targets in Yemen. And by proactive, I mean airstrikes. Now, Iran has issued a stark warning saying that the U.S. plans to form a multinational task force aimed at securing shipping routes in the Red Sea would be, quote, an irrational move, and they will be faced with extraordinary problems. He went on to say that nobody can make a move in the region where we, Iran, have predominance. Okay, so first of all, Iran does not have predominance. They are like irritating, biting horseflies. A single U.S. carrier strike group has more combat power than the entire Iranian Navy, and the U.S. has 11 of these. So in response, we need to redesignate the Houthis as a terrorist organization. President Biden removed the designation, and he had good intentions. The administration had hoped that removing them would signal the Houthis to reduce hostilities, enter into talks, and improve conditions for the Yemeni people. Instead, the Houthis have intensified their attacks inside and outside of Yemen, shunned all diplomatic efforts by UN mediators, and deepened the humanitarian crisis by diverting and stealing humanitarian aid to their own fighters. Clearly, the Houthis, who took power in the southern parts of Yemen, as I showed you, do not care about their people, but instead care about being belligerent to the rest of the world. And again, I do mean the rest of the world because the shipping involves multiple countries. So redesignate them as a terrorist organization and provide exceptions for humanitarian aid. The U.S. has done this before in Syria and Iraq. The Saudis, the UAE, and Yemen itself have already designated the Houthis as terrorists. Additionally, I don't think a retaliation will draw Iran into a broader conflict. The Iranians have taken huge steps to avoid direct conflict via funding proxies, and we've been striking Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria since this war began, and even before. Hell, under Trump, we killed an Iranian general in Iraq, and Iran did nothing meaningful to the U.S. So striking yet another Iranian-backed proxy isn't going to draw Iran into the broader fight, and Iran has already been funding and providing equipment to the Houthis. Now, this fragile peace that people keep talking about, you don't get to declare a peace and then continue to shoot at any ship, no matter what country it comes from. Oh, except for obviously Russia, who is supporting the Houthis, and still maintain this peace. You have this expectation to maintain it. The U.S. and its allies have shown incredible restraint despite global shipping being attacked. The defensive posture of the U.S. right now is emboldening the Houthis, and they will continue to step up their attacks under the funding and support of the likes of Russia and Iran. The U.S. should immediately retaliate against the Houthis for their attacks on innocent civilian shipping in the Red Sea. If we do not, the Houthis will continue to escalate, and the Iranians will have thought that their threats against the U.S. and its allies were credible, despite the fact that we could steamroll them. And I'm not saying boots on the ground here, but appropriate mirrored responses of airstrikes and cruise missile strikes are certainly warranted when they're shooting missiles at our allies, at civilian ships, and even at our own U.S. military ships.